Alright you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out you guys, I got a banger for you. And this is a story that some of you have probably seen me preview over the course of the last 7 or 8 months. But up until now, I haven't ran it because there was a few things that I had to follow up on. But this is a good story, and it's one of those stories that has a lot of moving parts to it. It's another example about how the Mexican Mafia was able to flesh out and identify a police informant that was working with law enforcement and giving up information that was detrimental to the Mexican Mafia's street operations. Then there's the high drama of not only the internal politics and how it actually all unfolds, but then there's also the homicide, how it was all orchestrated, who was involved, and how the bait and hook tactics were implemented. So anyways, for all you history buffs and you history sticklers that want to know when, where, why, who, how, what, etc., etc., the events that transpired in this story took place between 2005 and 2008. Around this time, 2 documented Mexican Mafia members, Frank Cruz and Jose Castaneda, had basically already found out that an individual by the name of Ray Lopez, who was also known as Little Ray Ray, was an informant and had been working with the police. And for the purpose of this story, I'm going to refer to Frank Cruz as Pancho and Jose Castaneda as Cisco. You know, I'm not sure what role Cisco played in this as far as whether or not he held a leadership position. I know he was Pancho's right-hand man, but Pancho was allegedly a crew chief who was in charge of a Mexican Mafia street crew in the Long Beach Harbor area. He was responsible for collecting taxes from all the local street gangs as well as the street dealers in that area who were allowed to freelance and sell their product, or what's also referred to as the kickback taxes. Don't quote me on this, but at the time, I'm about 90% sure that he was working under a Mexican Mafia member by the name of Emiliano Lopez, Tonito from Huimas, who's now deceased. And I'll be running something on this sometime in the near future that's titled Tonito's Reign Over Wilmington. And although I'm sure a lot of you have already heard his story, I'm hoping that I'll be able to give you guys a little bit more details about how Tonito and Sleepy controlled Wilmington, how Tonito's incessant habit of talking business over the phones became his downfall, and then how he was ultimately stabbed more than 80 times and taken out in Calipatria State Prison. So apparently Pancho and Cisco had initially been influenced into believing that Little Ray Ray was an informant based on rumors and based solely on what people on the streets who knew Little Ray Ray were saying. And they were obviously under the impression, for one reason or another, that he was possibly working with the cops. You know, on a side note, check it out. From everything I was able to gather, it was either because of the things Little Ray Ray was involved in, the fact that he never seemed to go to jail, and because of his close association with the cop that he claimed he had in his pocket. You know, and I just finished talking about something like this in the last Q&A that I just did. You know, and here's the thing you guys got to keep in mind. Whether it's on the streets or behind the walls, whenever you have consistent interaction between cops, COs, or other forms of law enforcement and inmates or people who are involved in that type of lifestyle, it's common to forge these types of symbiotic relationships. Inmates are obviously open to establishing these types of working relationships with cops or COs because they become highly instrumental in smuggling in drugs, cell phones, and other forms of contraband, either in the county jails, prisons, or in other institutions. Something that's essential in not only the building process, but also in generating revenue and in helping them become self-sustaining. And in that world, manipulating or compromising a cop and having them in pocket is considered to be not only a personal victory, but also a key asset as well. On the flip side of it, cops or COs choose to forge these types of relationships with inmates or those involved in the criminal element, either because of financial problems, where they've basically reached a point of desperation and need to make some fast money because they're sympathizers and have some kind of vested interest in being part of the team, or because they've righteously been compromised and manipulated into crossing that line. But whatever the case might be, or whatever's motivating this type of mutual interaction, the one thing that I didn't talk about when I mentioned all this in that Q&A is the possible drawbacks that can come from these types of relationships. You know, every situation is different and comes with its own set of circumstances. But like I said, one of the drawbacks is the type of negative attention you might get from working too close with a cop or someone from law enforcement. Some people frown on it on any level, and based on what might be involved, they might even try to take something out of context. And as you can see by this story, that's obviously what happened to Little Ray Ray. I'm not saying that he wasn't cooperating, but even though it was well known that he had a cop in pocket, people were still questioning why he never went to jail. Maybe because he had a cop giving him a heads up anytime he was under an investigation or when law enforcement were onto whatever he was doing out there on the streets. But Pancho and Cisco put their own spin on this, and they had their own theories about why this cop decided to look the other way whenever little Ray Ray committed a crime. They didn't believe it was because he was in pocket or that it was because he had been compromised. They believe it was because little Ray Ray was an informant and because he was giving this cop sensitive information. So this cop's name was Brian Buchanan, and he worked for the Long Beach Police Department. I'll get into the specifics and the agreement that he had with little Ray Ray later in this story, but first, let me tell you guys how this kind of all played out. So initially, little Ray Ray's dealings with this cop Buchanan was kept deep under wraps. In the beginning, little Ray Ray kept his card to himself and he used it to his advantage. But eventually it ended up coming to light, and that's when he had to be forthcoming about it. He had to explain to people in the streets who knew him and who had become aware of his unusual interaction with this cop. So at the time, sometime in 2006, Buchanan was actively making a lot of arrests on individuals who were involved in selling narcotics. And at some point, it became known amongst these circles that little Ray Ray was talking to him. So I guess there was an individual named Larry Robbins who was a documented gang member. And at some point in 2005, this guy Larry and a female named Cheryl Inaria, who was a close friend of little Ray Ray's, had participated in a home invasion robbery. So when Cheryl was taken out about a month after she hit this house with Larry, possibly by the victim, Larry gave little Ray Ray a green light to tell Buchanan about Cheryl's part in the robbery so that they could whack the guy who they believed was responsible for taking her out. I guess they wanted Buchanan to be aware of this so that he would possibly look the other way and not come after them for avenging her death. But unfortunately, things didn't work out the way that they were hoping it would. Instead, later, police ended up arresting Larry and Buchanan's name was on the police report. You know, there's a lot more to it, and without all the other details, I know it probably don't make a lot of sense, but that's basically how it all came out. At any rate, based on everything that Pancho and Cisco knew about little Ray Ray and his involvement with this cop Buchanan, they had pretty much already put a green light on him and were already in the planning stages of how it was going to be carried out. But due to little Ray Ray's close association with the Mexican Mafia, being someone who not only assisted him, but also was someone who was assigned to work with Pancho's street crew, they wanted to follow up on this and double check with one of their channels who was incarcerated in the LA County Jail, a guy by the name of Jose Gallegos, who was also known as Cyclone. And let me just get this part of it out the way right now. These guys talked about all this openly on the blue recorded county jail phones. They made the same mistakes that you hear these guys make in most of these stories. These calls would later come out during the trial and they would be played for the jury. And to say that they were highly damaging or that they had an adverse effect on the jury's decision is an understatement. These calls sunk both Pancho and Cisco. You know, I don't want to sound like I'm being too critical, especially because I'm guilty of making some of the same mistakes when I landed in the Santa Clara County Jail, but it just seems like this part of these stories never fails. Someone's always talking recklessly over the recorded phones, and this is always used against these guys in the end when they end up going to trial. Needless to say, Cyclone basically told Pancho and Cisco to do whatever they thought was right, but to just keep them posted so that they stayed in the loop and knew what was going on. Now, Cisco was the one who did most of the communicating with Cyclone, and he basically told Cyclone verbatim that they were just waiting for paperwork on little Ray Ray and that they were going to take him on a journey over there to the great beyond. After he said this, he referenced two deceased Mexican singers. You know, and I'm sure you guys would agree that there's nothing elaborate or discreet about the way that they were communicating and that anyone who might have been listening knew exactly what they were talking about. If it wasn't clear at that point, then Cisco definitely made it clear when he finished up this conversation by saying, "We're already planning. We've already bought his ticket. We're just waiting to give it to him." So I don't know how they got the paperwork that confirmed that little Ray Ray was providing information to this cop Buchanan, but they definitely ended up getting it, and this pretty much sealed his fate. Well, let me rephrase that. I guess I do know how they were able to get it. The same way we were able to get 1,956 pages of court-sealed documents smuggled out of the federal courthouse that pertain to Operation Black Widow is the same way that they were able to get the goods on little Ray Ray. Either through a corrupt prosecutor who trades favors with a defense attorney, a court clerk who knows somebody and ends up disseminating this type of information, or through someone else that works at the courthouse or works somewhere and has access at one of these databases. You know, this kind of information gets leaked out or accessed in a number of different ways. It just takes the right people who have access to it and who have a vested interest in wanting to put it out there. So for people who might think that they can work with law enforcement and that this information will always be kept under lock and key or that it'll never be exposed, they might want to rethink doing that and understand that that ain't always true. These kinds of things always have a good chance of being exposed, especially when you're dealing with criminal organizations like the Mexican Mafia. Just like the NF or the AB, they have a lot of reach. At any rate, in the early part of July of 2007, Pancho and Cisco enlisted the assistance of another Mexican Mafia associate by the name of Daniel Navarro. And for the purpose of this story, I'm now going to refer to this guy Daniel Navarro as Toro. So Toro was an up-and-coming hitter who was trying to make a name for himself. And he was obviously also aspiring to be a member of the Mexican Mafia someday as well. So when Pancho and Cisco summoned him and Ferdinand Bermudez, who also went by Capone, about taking out Little Ray Ray, he responded by saying he'd be honored to accept this responsibility without so much as giving it a second thought. And I'm sure he probably did feel some sense of honor for taking Little Ray Ray's life and for just being trusted by the Mexican Mafia the way he was. But I just can't help but wonder if he still feels the same way today. Who knows? Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But he's the one who's got to live with the choices he made. So for his sake, I just hope he feels content either way and that he still feels as enthusiastic as he did the day when he pulled the trigger. Otherwise, he's probably wallowing in misery and kicking himself in the ass for not being smarter. At any rate, after fine-tuning their game plan and priming Toro up for this assignment, they gave him a weapon to use and made it clear that they wanted that weapon back. A mistake that I'm sure they would later come to regret. So after picking up the gun, Toro, along with another Mexican Mafia associate, ended up gunning Little Ray Ray down on July 26, 2007. And that was pretty much it. There was nothing really complicated or complex about the way that they carried it out. They had someone call Little Ray Ray and tell him to pull up to a designated spot so that they could discuss a matter of importance with him. And then when he got there, Toro walked up to the passenger side of the car he was driving and shot him 5 times. Just like that, nothing was said. Toro did it as soon as he pulled up to the curb. Someone would end up calling 911 and reporting the shooting within minutes of it happening, but by the time the paramedics got there, Little Ray Ray had already succumbed to his injuries. So aside from some of the other mistakes Pancho and Cisco made, when it came to all the damaging dialogue that was discussed over the county jail phones and talking about things that other people shouldn't have been privy to, one of the biggest mistakes that they made was not getting rid of the gun that was used to take out Little Ray Ray. Maybe they had plans to melt it down and get rid of it later, but remember, when they gave it to Toro, they made it clear that they wanted it back. And they ended up getting it. After Toro committed the homicide, Pancho got the gun back from him and put it in a safe that he had in his house. So fast forward a couple weeks later, a Long Beach homicide detective by the name of Todd Johnson started working the case and developed enough evidence that implicated Pancho as being a viable suspect who they believed was involved in Little Ray Ray's homicide. And apparently people that had some knowledge about what was going on and some of the details involving Little Ray Ray's homicide started pointing fingers at Pancho. The detectives knew that he probably wasn't the one who actually pulled the trigger, but they believed he was involved based on information that they had indicating that he was a crew chief who was operating a Mexican Mafia street crew in that area and that he was probably the one who gave that directive. And just based on this information alone was enough for the detectives to get enough probable cause to get a search warrant, and that's what they did. So about 2 weeks after Little Ray Ray's homicide, Detective Todd Johnson, Long Beach PD, and other law enforcement agencies converged on Pancho's house and conducted a search warrant. And during the course of the search, they recovered a gun, 2 bulletproof vests, about a pound of methamphetamine, and several small caliber rounds. This alone was enough to bury Pancho based on him facing his 3rd strike. But the other thing that they found that definitely sealed the deal is the gun that Toro used to shoot Little Ray Ray. Pancho still had it in his safe. Why he still had the weapon made no sense. But like I said, maybe he had plans to get rid of it later and just procrastinated. But this was a mistake that would end up costing both him and Cisco. So the last part of this story is basically what happened during the trial and who ended up getting convicted. A lot of people ended up cooperating, but again, some of these people that knew about the details of Little Ray Ray's homicide should have never been told about the details in the first place. And this is something that Pancho and Cisco only had themselves to blame for. So during the trial, the one individual who stood tall and didn't fold under pressure was Toro. Toro actually came in as a defense witness and testified that he took Little Ray Ray out under his own volition without the influence or participation of anyone else. He said that he knew Little Ray Ray was a snitch and that when you have that type of jacket on the streets, you don't need to get a green light or a directive from anyone. That Little Ray Ray was basically open game and anyone who knew about this could have got him. Toro did everything he could to save Pancho and Cisco, including throwing himself under the bus. but the prosecutor wasn't having it and basically planted the seed in the jury's mind that Toro was trying to play the fall guy for two reputable leaders of the Mexican Mafia. Something that he didn't necessarily have to do, but something that he was morally supposed to do. And the jury believed the prosecutor. It didn't help that Pancho had the weapon that was used to gun Little Ray Ray down in the safe either. So the cop, Brian Buchanan, that Little Ray Ray was supposedly giving information to, also testified. And if it came as any measure of consolation to both Pancho and Cisco, Buchanan confirmed that Little Ray Ray was in fact an informant and that he had been providing law enforcement information for over 10 years. So their suspicions about Little Ray Ray and him giving up information to law enforcement was on point. You know, aside from the things that I already pointed out, there were things about the way he was moving or things he was doing that put him under a cloud of suspicion. And he was definitely playing a dangerous game. You know, when you function on that level where you're out there in the streets working with people who are involved in organized crime and just the type of people who are on a whole different level of sophistication, it's hard to play both sides and keep those kind of hidden agendas. Sooner or later, you're going to make a mistake or slip up and let someone see something that's going to make people pay closer attention to your movements. You know, some people are really good at being chameleons and at disguising their colors, but there's also people that are good at identifying these things too. So it's just a dangerous game to play. Anyways, with regards to the criminal trial, a lot of people that were pressed or questioned by the homicide investigators ended up cooperating and testifying in court. And most of them were close Mexican Mafia associates that were formerly part of Tonito's street crew. Olvido Salazar, who's also known as Flaco, Michael Franco, who also went by Boxer, and Fernandad Bermudez, who they call Capone, were all members of Tonito's street crew. And like I said, I'll be running a story on them in the near future, but they testified in that case as well. So Capone testified about how Pancho and Cisco were concerned about Little Ray Ray having this cop in his pocket and how this cop might have agreed to look the other way when Little Ray Ray committed crimes because he was possibly a police informant. Capone went on to say that this is when Pancho and Cisco summoned him and Toro to a meeting to discuss their concerns. And acting on this suspicion that this is when Toro was given a directive to take him out. So they also brought in another homicide detective named Hugo Cortez, who worked alongside Todd Johnson, and he testified about the events that took place on the day before Little Ray Ray was taken out. So Detective Cortez testified that when he interviewed Capone in 2008, he told him that on the day before Little Ray Ray was taken out, that Little Ray Ray drove Toro to a Walgreens on Atlantic Avenue in Long Beach to purchase some cosmetics and other items for Cisco, who at that time had just gotten out and had parole from prison. Cortez also testified that Little Ray Ray's phone showed that he made 3 phone calls to Pancho a few hours before the homicide was committed. They were also able to see that his phone pinged off of a cell phone tower in that area, which obviously is indicative that Pancho was in the process of rocking him to sleep and setting him up. Michael Franco, Boxer, testified that Pancho was an active Mexican Mafia member who was appointed to act as the crew chief in both the Long Beach and Harbor areas. Boxer also identified Pancho's voice from an audio jailhouse phone call with Jose Gallegos, Cyclone, where they made several references about Little Ray Ray. In another call with Cisco, Cisco asked Cyclone, "Hey, what's up with that fool Ray?" Cyclone responds by saying, "I know he's a bit of a snake, but I know we can keep him in pocket." And this is the same call where Cisco tells Cyclone, "We're just waiting on the paperwork on Ray. We're about to take him on a journey over there to the great beyond. We've already bought his ticket. We're just waiting to give it to him." You know, and despite multiple objections by both defense attorneys, the prosecutor also played a recorded phone call between Pancho and Tonito that proved a correlation between Pancho and the Mexican Mafia. You know, when I run that other story titled Tonito's Reign Over Wilmington, you guys are going to see that Tonito had a real bad habit of discussing business openly over the phones. It was so bad, he actually became known for this. You know, they also brought in a female lieutenant to testify about how confidential informants are documented in police reports and how these reports are accessible to the public. And I believe they did this for the purpose of making it clear to the jury that the police, the courts, or the entire criminal process isn't liable for this information being disseminated, and that they have a constitutional obligation to release it to the public. So next, after this lieutenant testified, they brought in Olvido Salazar, Flaco, who also testified about the definition of paperwork, but from the perspective of gang members and what PW means to them, or specifically as it pertained to these phone calls. He basically said it's usually official court documents that would have proved that Little Ray Ray definitely made inappropriate statements to law enforcement and that he was working with the cops. From there, he would have went on the lista or the BNL, the bad news list. So Flaco also testified that Pancho was in charge of collecting Mexican Mafia taxes from all the local street gangs in the Long Beach and Harbor area. and that he was also responsible for collecting the kickback taxes that were imposed on the local street dealers who were allowed to freelance in territory that the Mexican Mafia considered to be theirs. The last one to testify for the prosecutor was a criminologist named Troy Ward. He testified about all the forensic evidence, including the spent shell casings that were recovered from the crime scene and the bullets that were recovered from Little Ray Ray's body. He claimed that after he thoroughly performed several forensic and ballistic tests on the spent bullets that were recovered from Little Ray Ray's body and the gun that was found in Pancho's safe, that there was no doubt in his opinion that this was the same gun that was used to shoot Little Ray Ray. In closing this up, let me just say this. It's obvious that these guys made a lot of physical and mental mistakes. And again, I don't say this to be critical because I'm nobody to pass that kind of judgment on these guys when I made a lot of the same mistakes myself. I'm just simply putting everything in perspective for you guys. And as far as the people that turned, there's nothing you can do to counter that. Unless you have a crystal ball, nobody knows who's gonna fold until the pressure is on and they get put in that position. You can try to make an educated guess, but these kinds of things are gonna happen no matter what. The one thing that they could have avoided that I always point out to you guys in these stories is the amount of unnecessary dialogue that they chose to talk about on the phone. Everybody knows that these phones are recorded, but yet it's almost like they forget as soon as the call is accepted. There's even an admonishment that tells you every time you make a call that it's being recorded. But again, it somehow gets lost when these conversations are taking place. Every case is different, but in this case, the phone calls came back to hurt these guys just as bad as the witnesses who testified against them. They actually even brought in cell phone experts that testified that Little Ray Ray called Pancho, Cisco, and Toro several times on the night of his homicide, and that some of these calls were made near the Walgreens on Atlantic Avenue. Needless to say, Pancho and Cisco got wiped out and slammed on everything, despite the fact that their attorneys put on a contentious and hard-fought defense. They played all their cards. Police misconduct, mishandling the chain of evidence, tampering and planting evidence, police coercion, tainted testimony, etc., etc. But unfortunately, when you make these kinds of accusations in a criminal case like this, the burden of proof falls on you to prove what's called a specific factual scenario. You basically have to show a valid theory as to how the information might be admissible material. And this is something that they couldn't do. They even went after one of the lead detectives, Hugo Cortez, and tried to get him impeached by following the pitches review. They argued that he was not only a key figure throughout every phase and every facet of the trial, but that he also permeated it as well. He authored several reports, drafted the search warrants and arrest affidavits, he was in charge of the crime scene, he attended the autopsy, he collected and booked bullets that were recovered during the autopsy, he reviewed the phone records, interviewed several witnesses, interrogated Capone for over 5 hours, and acted as Capone's personal handler during the trial. They also pointed out that he pointed his gun at Cisco, he accosted one of the defense attorneys, that he tainted Capone's testimony by feeding him information during the trial, and finally, they claimed he orchestrated delivery of tampered evidence to the ballistic lab. They made a lot of accusations, but again, they didn't meet the burden of proof, and it basically all went nowhere and got shot down by the trial court. So Pancho ended up being convicted of first-degree homicide, conspiracy to commit homicide, possession of a firearm, gang and gun enhancements, which were all used to trigger the 3 strikes law. And the trial court sentenced him to an indeterminate sentence of 80 years to life, plus an additional determinate sentence of 11 years, 4 months. Cisco ended up being convicted of first-degree homicide, conspiracy to commit homicide, gang and gun enhancements, and like Pancho, they were also used to trigger the 3 strikes law. He was ultimately sentenced to an indeterminate term of 110 years to life. So there you have it, another story where again there's no winners and there was nothing to gain from all the work that these guys put in. In the end, the only payoff that these guys got for their loyalty and for pushing the line that they did were some long-ass prison sentences. You hear some of these guys talk about how they're different and how they couldn't live with themselves if they were ever to betray the people that they've placed their loyalty in, and it almost sounds believable because again, it sounds real good. And they say it like they even believe it themselves. But how many of you guys believe them when they say this? Because I even remember saying this at one time myself. It's easy to say that when you haven't been tested and you don't really know what it feels like to be put in that position. But I'm telling you now, all that gangster talk and being a real one gets lost when your life's hanging in the balance and reality puts you in a different place. I truly hope that none of you, active or not, ever have to go through something like that. But if you don't believe nothing else that I tell you guys, believe me when I tell you that false sense of pride that you hear some of these guys yapping about disappears, and that self-preservation has a way of humbling you. You know, we only get one chance at life. There is no do-overs or second chances. So if you drop the ball and squander your time here, you're the only one who's going to have to live with those regrets. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like it, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. And again, something else that's extremely important that I'm going to continue to keep reminding you guys about is to not only hit the like, drop a comment, and share the video, but also hit the all symbol on the notification bell so you're advised whenever I drop content on the channel. So with that being said, as always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for also continuing to tap into the channel. In the meantime, you guys enjoy the rest of your day and keep pushing that positivity. Until the next one, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.